Okay. Now, sorry, I was supposed to start with Joseph Hoffmann. Okay, Hoffmann, Joseph Hoffmann, the first, apparently he was the first star architect or star architect for some reason. Now he is forgotten by many, but I guess that's the fate for many human stars. Born 1870, died in 1956. So Hoffmann, Joseph Hoffmann, was an Austrian architect and designer. He was among the founders of Vienna Secession and co-establisher of the Vienna Werkstätte. His most famous architectural work is the Palais Stoclet in Brussels from 1905-1911. So he was 35 when he started to work on this. Actually, just like Adolf Loos, he was born in the same year as Adolf Loos, 1870. Interesting, I didn't know this. A pioneering work of modern architecture, Art Deco, and peak of Vienna Secession architecture. So the first architect, and this is the man with a funny mustache, but at that time, I think other men indulge in something like this. He doesn't seem to be too unhappy here. I talked with Wolf Prix the other day about, I attempted to talk with him. I asked him, what about, by the way of Beethoven and joy, what about the relationship between suffering and joy? And I actually expected that he would protest against the word suffering and what it means. But I think those who are so uncomfortable talking about suffering are probably very disposed to suffering or even depression, but exactly because of it, they reject it. He told me, well, Mozart was a playboy and had a lot of money and girls, and until the end of his life, when everything went down, and then Haydn, he said, was an avoidance of actually life in itself is problematic and perhaps even tragic for all of us, the human destiny. We are born in order to die. So it's not that you search for suffering, but suffering is part of life, just as in the dialectics of light and shadow is. Anyway, this was a side talk. Okay, Joseph Hoffmann and some drawings by him. I go rather quickly because we have a lot to cover. In total, probably almost 600 pictures. He was quite joyous, in fact, about employing ornaments and in an almost feminine way, if I can say so, or childlike way. Not that they are necessarily associated a feminine way with a childlike way, but in this he is very atypical, at least for our time. What architect today would indulge in something like this? Not many, I think, or like this. So these sketches, these drawings, I think, do tell us something about him. And he was indeed an architect who had an interest in decorations and ornaments. And look at this drawing. It's almost done like by a child, in the kindergarten. Well, it's done by one of the major architects of the 20th century. Yes, he loved textiles, he loved fabrics, he did designs for them, he did all kinds of designs, graphic designs, object designs. But the drawing, look at the drawing. Truly, this is a drawing that probably a number of kids all over the world do from time to time. The paradigmatic, innocent little window with a cross in the middle, and then that thing at the top, and then I don't know, the whole drawing you wouldn't say is done by a cultivated, sophisticated Viennese architect. Joseph Hoffmann. Now Villa Spitzer in Austria from 1902-1903. Well, the built work is a little bit different from the drawings. From the drawings in general, as we saw, the drawings are much more light-hearted and innocent in a way, and without the gravity that gravity brings upon us, but the building is a little different. Anyway, but the interior does show a world that indulged in the beauty of ornaments. And I think it is associated with him, that anecdote that the architect designed everything inside the house, including the sleepers of the owner. And when once he visited the owner of the house and the house, he noticed to his despair that the owner had a different kind of sleepers, not the ones he designed, and he became extremely agitated, outraged, in fact, and screamed at the owner, you know, how dare you use a pair of sleepers that do not match the design of the whole building. Anyway, the architect as a terrorist, as the architect could very well be, and many times, unfortunately, is. Anyway, the ivy is always a benefit to any building. And that's why I joke, I tell the students, if the facade, the study of the facade of your building doesn't bring fruitful results, just launch the ivy and it will take care of it. Okay, another villa from 1902. His built work is not rigid, but there is a strictness to it that you wouldn't expect from those sketches I showed, and also from his interior design. Le Corbusier apparently wanted to work with him and for him, and Joseph Hoffmann, ignoring what the future might have been for the young Le Corbusier, didn't arrange for a meeting. They didn't even meet. But the fact that Le Corbusier wanted to work for him shows a lot about his reputation at that time, because Le Corbusier was not really fond of working for other people, just like Tadao Ando. Although he did work for other people, as opposed to, I mean, he worked for Peter Beras, I think, as opposed to Tadao Ando, who didn't work for anybody. Although from what I read, he did attempt to work for some people or somebody, and those people became very dissatisfied with him, and he had to leave very, very early. And also apparently Tadao Ando, it's not that he rejected the school rejected him. He did want to study architecture, but his grades from high school were not the greatest, and that's why he was not accepted. This didn't, of course, arrest his development at all. Okay, another villa, quite big. They are getting bigger and bigger. The geometry is still strict, but inside, fluidities and sweet even decorations happen. A very interesting culture. So today we are going to see two Austrians, Joseph Hoffmann, and the other one is Hundertwasser, who was actually a painter, but he built, and Austria was generous with him, and not just Austria. He built also in Germany and in Switzerland and in New Zealand. It's interesting that certain countries are not very strict in offering the chance to build to people who didn't have any training in architecture. I'm not talking about Hoffmann, I'm talking about Hundertwasser. Yeah, after a while you can get a little bit tired of the villas by Hoffmann, but you know, we have to go through them because this is what he mainly built. If you take away the windows as they are, the building is, you know, could be almost anywhere and built at almost any time. But the interior shows signs of the secession, of the secessionist movement, which claimed that to each time its art and to each art its freedom. But from what we see from the outside, the buildings are not really so animated by freedom as you would expect. Villa Primavesi, this building I saw a few times and is quite a large building and imposing, probably someone of certain means, I mean, without probably, someone of certain means lives here. It's a palace, and so is the plot of land it situates itself on is at the edge of Vienna. Yeah, villas, villas, villas. Today I expected, or I didn't think too much about Oscar Niemeyer, but I read today that he was a communist and he sustained, and he even became the president of the Communist Party in Brazil for some years, and he even had to go in exile because of it. But this so-called communist designed some very opulent villas, including for himself. So, you know, their conception about communism was very different from what we lived in here in Southeastern Europe. The same with Picasso. He was a communist as well, but a communist with a castle, at least one castle in France, and quite rich. Anyway, so back to Hoffmann and his grand villa, which is a building that is impressive even today and very well kept. A sanatorium from 1904, 1905. There was the age of sanatoriums for a while in Europe. I don't know if they were open to anyone. And look at the interior, you know, just to have this interior designed by the first star architect. So it was not an ordinary hospital or sanatorium, not at all. He designed everything, the furniture. It's very elegant and airy. The outside is more severe than the inside. And maybe this is to be expected to an extent. Sorry for this picture, it's a little small, the resolution here is better. I love that table, you know, that table with so many chairs on both sides probably would have increased a little bit the well-being of the sick people there, because to belong to such a large family probably has a positive effect on one's state of mind, and implicitly to an extent the well-being, the physical well-being. He loved checkers, as you can see, both outside, around the windows, on chairs, on the paving, everywhere there are checkers. checkers are some kind of a refuge for the one who has a tendency towards freedom, and then but still a kind of a rationalistic state of mind. So the checkers create some kind of dynamism within the square and with squares. You see, he uses squares everywhere, even here on this table, and they are everywhere. And this is the ground table for the people in the hospital, in the sanatorium. Now, this is his major work, and he's present in all histories of modern architecture with this building, Palais Stoclet in Brussels, in Belgium. It's a fine building, we have to confess, and it does have the level of innovation is higher, the level of freedom is higher, formal freedom, and it has a complexity that cannot be denied. Joseph Hoffmann, the checkers again in the kitchen. He designed everything, as I said, the cabinets and maybe even the plates on those shelves, the lamps, a total work of art, as one would say. Some Gustav Klimt-like works on the interior walls, African sculptures or mimicking being African, and an eclecticism, but an eclecticism that was unified by certain mannerisms that he had. So very different from Adolf Loos, born in the same year, but although something might connect them if I look at this interior, except that the columns in the work of Joseph Hoffmann are more feminine or more slender, and there is decoration, something that Adolf Loos violently dismissed. But he didn't dismiss the natural ornaments of marble, which are also present in the work of Joseph Hoffmann. The spiral, even the rationalists love the spiral. This building, I didn't see too many histories of modern architecture where this building was not shown. It's a must. Even colors that are maybe they are faded here, I don't know, but this kind of pink is rather unusual. Although there are some architects even today who use it, but pink is not truly the preferred color of architects. Now, this is a very interesting work, the Austrian Pavilion for the Venice Biennial, and it still stands for the Venice Biennial. It's very, symmetrical, almost austere. It's a fine building, and it's almost 90 years old. And you wouldn't expect such a building from a secessionist architect, but it is. He liked these long tables. You see, there is one here as well. The Gustav Mahler gravestone, he also designed for himself. I imagine it was designed by himself. You'll see it later on. This is for Gustav Mahler, who had a very interesting wife, a remarkable woman who had who stirred up the hearts of other remarkable men, not just Gustav Mahler, Oskar Kokoschka, even Friedrich Nietzsche, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure about Nietzsche, but Walter Gropius. I mean, this woman was Alma Mahler. She was unbelievable, married to Gustav Mahler. I think she was even married to Walter Gropius. Then she was a lover of Oscar's, of Kokoschka, and there was another one. I forgot him. Anyway, his own grave. It sounds so, I don't know, strange, to say his own grave. It is very, actually, it is almost a paradigmatic gravestone. Maybe all of us, could have something similar. If we were not too vertical in life, at least we could mimic verticality in the afterlife. By the way of this, I read again something that I wondered if I read in the past correctly, that Carlos Carpa is buried vertically at the Brion Cemetery. There is a horizontal sign where he is buried, but in actuality, I read that in two different places. He's buried in the wall somewhere vertical, in a vertical position. Strange. Gustav Klimt's grave, this is very low key, but it has flowers around it, and yeah, great artist. A great artist who was very admired and maybe loved by women, but he lived all his life with his mother, which is very strange, and his cats. Even when he had an acknowledged so-called official mistress, he still continued to live with his mother. Unbelievable. Anyway, some designs by Joseph Hoffmann. He designed everything, as I said. And if you have a fork or a knife designed by Hoffmann, you could consider yourself rich. He loved to design objects, chairs, forks, knives, vases, lamps, everything. And with the craftsmen that Vienna had, he was able to manufacture very high quality objects. Some are more whimsical, some more creative, others. He was a very prolific designer. Bulky, but it's probably very comfortable. Sorry, this is in Romanian. I don't know how to translate it in English. Anyway, this is the last image of the presentation on Joseph Hoffmann. It's a piece of, something for ladies to wear attached to a dress or whatever. Okay, we'll go now to the next presentation on this highly accomplished and prolific architect from Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer. Oscar Niemeyer, who has, I think now some kind of there is a new interest in him. He lived a long life, very long life. As you can see, he died at 105, at 105 years. But he didn't work actually for the past more than several, a good number of years. He didn't, plus he was also in exile, but he built a lot. In fact, so much that at one moment I had to give up on continuing to add new works. I have 250 images here, but I could have had easily 500. So he was born on December 15th, known as Oscar Niemeyer in Brazilian Portuguese. Was a Brazilian architect considered to be one of the key figures in the development of modern architecture. Niemeyer was best known for his design of civic buildings for Brasilia, Brasilia, a planned city that became Brazil's capital in 1960, as well as his collaboration with other architects on the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. His exploration of the aesthetic possibilities of reinforced concrete was highly influential in the late 20th and early 20th centuries. And this is the man smoking, smoking, smoking. He had a good life, no doubt. And who wouldn't, you know, to be an architect and to build as much as he did, it can only be rewarding. Not that he didn't have troubles. He did political troubles because of his left-wing leanings, although he doesn't look too dissatisfied here. Some drawings. I used to like, when I studied architecture, I used to like his drawings. At a certain point, he was influenced by Le Corbusier, but in the end, he got rid of the influence, so he became very himself, so to speak, in his sketches. His sketches are kind of like his buildings, in a way, very simple, and I don't know. We'll say more about them when we arrive at those buildings. In a certain way, I would say he simplified reality in order to obtain monumentality or a certain unity of design. And because of it, I think some people think that his work is not as profound as we would all like it to be. He was a great admirer of beauty in all forms, including the feminine body. You see a parallel here between the silhouette that is laying here probably on the beach. Let's not forget, this is Brazil. And then one of his buildings in Brasilia, in the capital. A sketch for the cathedral in Brasilia. And then another sketch for the major building in the new capital of Brazil. So we begin with these buildings, the Ministry of Education and Health in Rio de Janeiro. He contributed, I don't know exactly in what this means, several projects that I'm going to show mentioned that he contributed to Lucio Costa's project or to Le Corbusier's project. I guess he was part of the team and had some impact on the design. This is a building by Le Corbusier, but Oscar Niemeyer, as a younger man, was part of the team. Just as it happened at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Some people think that the building was in part designed by Le Corbusier, others that Oscar Niemeyer had a bigger influence. Then Stephen Harrison Wallace was actually the architect in charge. It's hard to judge for such buildings exactly what the contribution was. But a certain aesthetics, a certain architectural language is identifiable with him. This is a book with a little bit a questionable title, Between Concrete and Curves. I mean, I don't know. Usually when you use such a title, Between A and B is, I mean, you know, between concrete and curves, as if the concrete cannot be curved, when in fact it can, very much so. Anyway, but he's, I mean, where do you see the curves here? Not too many curves. Association of Charitable Work created a vertical brise soleil from 1937, and vertical it is. It's not a very large building. These are earlier works before the war. We'll see in the 50s when he produced a lot for for Brasilia, for the capital of Brazil. And he was very, very successful and very influential. Hotel from 1938. In a certain way, I like some of these works more than the later work, which became a little manneristic and predictable. This work was still a little bit timid, but that timidity, I think, was actually a quality. It didn't yet become that Oscar Niemeyer that we know of. Is more hybrid, more impure, but because of it, I think, to an extent, more real and more complex. The language was still modern, yes. And he loved these ramps. He employs them all the time, as he employs swimming pools, and there is often water in the proximity of his buildings. Brazil also has a great Baroque architecture, and we attempted to concentrate on European architecture, on North American architecture, on, I don't know, Japanese architecture, but there are other parts in the world that have very interesting architecture that sometimes, at least, we don't pay enough attention to. Now, this sketch, it looks very similar to what Le Corbusier would have drawn, but it's not by Le Corbusier; it's by Oscar Niemeyer. The Pavilion of Brazil in 1939. He said that he contributed to the Lucio Costa project, and again the ramp which brings dynamism to the composition and is animating a facade which otherwise would not have been particularly exciting, but the ramp does its job. You can tell it's a building that it's almost mid-century, well, 1939. Who would have thought at that time that the Second World War would ravish the world not much later? So this is the Pavilion of Brazil at the World Exhibition of 1939 in New York City. The one where Wallace Harrison built that trilon and the sphere that became the symbols of New York. A very interesting World's Fair, I think. Now, the Church of St. Francis of Assisi in Belo Horizonte from 1940. I like this building very much. So he was still rather young, and I always like to give this example of a modernistic church as an example of what one can do. Apparently, Oscar Niemeyer was an atheist, but this didn't preclude him from building, with my knowledge, at least three churches. Three churches we are going to see in this presentation. This is the first one, and is a very fine early work by Oscar Niemeyer. Why a church has to respect a certain dogma is beyond me. This is what the church in Romania asks for, but this is, I think, almost unacceptable from an architect's point of view. If man was created in the image and resemblance of God, and if God was and is creative, then man should be creative too. And Oscar Niemeyer was creative. And in this, I think he respected the spirit of creation, and thus of faith. The artwork on the facade is not his. I forgot the name of the artist, but he invited that artist, and he did a great job. This is a church dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi. And I think it's a great combination or meeting between the architect or the architecture or the building and the artwork. So bidimensionality and three-dimensionality, they meet halfway and they sustain each other. This is the, the conceptual sketch for the building. And so from 1940, but the building is really timeless. It is a modern piece of architecture, but it is timeless. And the fact that this facade of the building became a large canvas for the artwork and the choice of the artist was excellent. So I once did a project myself for San Francisco. Well, this is for San Francisco. And I remember I didn't want to do anything for man, for human beings. So I imagined a forest of little bird houses in, I think it was even called San Francisco Plaza in San Francisco, surrounded by big department stores like Bloomingdale and or Macy's, I forgot. So I filled that space with a forest of, as I call it, a forest of bird houses, until someone told me, well, what about the droppings of the birds? I didn't think of the droppings of the birds, but I thought of doing something for the birds and not for the human beings. I was in a dark mode then. Anyway, San Francisco was a fascinating presence in religion. I would say beyond the religions, beyond the specific religion he was part of. A very worthy saint. Maybe all saints are so or should be so, but he was more than that, I think. Anyway, this is a great church, which probably from a thermal point of view is not very well equipped. You see well, not air conditioners, the ventilators, the powerful industrial ventilators trying to move the air underneath so much concrete. And you are in Brazil. If you were in Stockholm, it would have been different, but you are in Brazil. So I don't think Oscar Niemeyer, in his quest for a pure architecture, think too much about such unimportant issues as the level of temperature within the building or so. Here is San Francisco talking with the birds, as he was famous to do. A bank from 1946, immediately after the war, and it's still I don't know. It's a modern building that has some dignity. The Odessa College, I don't have pictures. I also didn't show pictures of the United Nations headquarters. It is known by everybody. Plus, his role there is obscure. This is San Jose. It's a campus that has row houses. I just have these imperfect, small resolution pictures. Obviously, it's the work of an architect who had something to say and said it. Now, this is a park done with a famous landscape architect, Roberto Burle Marx, truly a very accomplished landscape designer. And they work together. Sorry for this picture. You see the architect and perhaps you see less the landscape architect, but they collaborated in in a way that was not nostalgic or passeistic, or it's a resolutely modern architecture with fluid forms. And I would say that the landscape architect made concessions, or anyway, he was the second violin in a way. This is a building that is part of this park by Oscar Niemeyer. He built such structures. He loved this shape. You will see other buildings by him done in a similar way. Yes, the modern attitude pays off if it's done skillfully, in the sense that it is fresh, it is rewarding through the simplicity of forms, through unconventional forms sometimes. Let's call this some kind of a cosmic modernism, if this doesn't sound too emphatic or too rhetorical. We are after the war. This is he worked also for political, for institutions, for political forces within Brazil and outside of Brazil as well. This is a tall building from 1951. Very interestingly done, the facade. Some kind of a Brazilian constructivism, or I don't know how to label it, if I am to label it. So there is capriciousness here, but this capriciousness is necessary. He broke the mold, so to speak, of the facade. And I think such capriciousness could be positive in any attempt to do an architecture that is also valuing some level of surprise. Another residential building in São Paulo. Here I was a little bit confused because I have pictures that seem to contradict these pictures, and I'm still not very clear if it is the back of this building or not. You'll see what I'm talking about. This is also an interesting building, and he uses, the truth is, Oscar Niemeyer, despite his formal inventiveness, he does at times repeat himself, but maybe this is unavoidable. Like Frank Lloyd Wright was accused once that he uses quotations too much, and he said, yes, I use quotations, but I quote from myself. Well, you could say that some people quote from themselves, and Oscar Niemeyer does do this a little bit. Anyway, it is this facade. I think is the back of the building, but it's very interesting. I mean, I like it. It's almost like a graphic work. What I see here, I like this, the aleatory, the character of the facade within the frame, the rational grid, but then because each one has, but maybe there is some level of coordination, because I see these curtains, there is blue, there is red, and who knows, maybe the architect has something to say there. But the other side of the building is very different. That's why I'm confused. This is the plan. Okay, his own personal home, that's the home of a communist, a certain kind of communist, no doubt. It's an opulent villa, and what can we say? He was a successful architect. I wonder if he would have had, I don't know, I wanted to say something about the House of Joy competition, but I'll abstain from now. Anyway, yeah, I guess one can be a communist and still live in such a house. Why not? Why should the communists live in the gutter? And his modernism is very different from the one practiced by Miss van der Rohe, for example. Although you might be tempted in some cases to compare the two, in some cases. There is a sensuality here, freedom of forming that, you know, the European Miss and other European architects would have had some difficulties with. But this is a Brazilian, and it shows. He can handle rectangularity to an extent as well. He can handle bringing huge stones within the building as well. He can handle using historicist pieces of furniture. Another residence from this is, you will see this motif where he pushes the limits of engineering almost to the limit. This is supported just in the corners, and it's a tour de force, but a tour de force is not always a very profound architecture, but it can be appealing, and anyway. It is a tour de force, and the landscape is probably done by Mr. Marx. I recognize his way of doing the landscape, a landscaping that is abstract and approaches the level of plastic art, as opposed to the church, to the woods, the forest behind that is something else, very much so. So we see two different kind of greenery, the one nature arrived at and the one man arrived at. They both operate with plants, they both operate with vegetable material. I'm sorry for the word operate, but the one that nature created is something else. So it's an interesting dialogue, I think. Not to mention the hills and the mountains. Yeah, here you see the structure of the whole thing. A little bit unexpected for a private residence. Interbau buildings in Berlin. This building I visited. I mean, from the outside, it stands out. It's a good building in a campus that has buildings by Alvar Aalto, Bakema, Walter Gropius. Not bad. This is an apartment building built in the 50s in Berlin by Oskar Niemeyer. In a certain way, Le Pilotis, that invention by Le Corbusier, become more appealing here because of these, more creative supports for the building, as opposed to, just straight, columns. He was a skillful architect. He loved to bring in the circulation, just like here with a tower and then some connections at various levels. So it becomes sculptural, the very movement within and without the building. This is the plan. It is in a way similar to l'unité d'habitation by Le Corbusier, which is larger. And actually Berlin does have a unité d'habitation by Le Corbusier as well, not on the same campus, in a different place in the city. But it is interesting in a way to compare the building by Oscar Niemeyer with the building by Le Corbusier. Now the Montreal building in Sao Paulo, we have seen this kind of facade a few minutes ago for that housing project. Here is a bank, and what can we say? Yeah, it's a bank. It's a bank that functions well, but I don't know. Is it a great architecture? What can we say? If I am to use an uninspired expression, I would say it's a decent building. Another building from 1955. I rush a little bit because we'll have to see a lot in Brasilia, the capital of the new capital of Brazil. This is a building that I think suffered some kind of you see at the top, there was probably a fire or something. Anyway, concrete functioned well in this case, and it was damaged just aesthetically. With some refurbishment would have been okay. The Triangle building in Sao Paulo. This is a newer building, and then the Eiffel building or Eiffel building. I don't know why this name probably has nothing to do. Actually, today, if I'm not mistaken, is also the birthday, but I just couldn't make another presentation of Gustave Eiffel, the engineer who produced the Eiffel Tower in Paris. I think he was born also on the 15th of December. This is quite a day. And also today, and I should have talked about her, was born Ray Eames, the great partner of Charles Eames in the very prolific and creative team of Charles and Ray Eames. Design, and also they built a little bit. I should have talked about Ray as well. Happy birthday, Ray Eames. But now we are still with Oscar Niemeyer in Sao Paulo. An interesting articulation of three buildings that almost welcome you and embrace you, not too tightly. Let's not get carried away by sentimentalism here. If a building embraces you, it shouldn't be a very tight embrace, I think. This is the plan. Very clean modernism, very simple, very everything. And the triangle helps. He was very skillful and very efficient in his skillfulness. Sorry for the resolution. I like the chairs, but those were not designed by him. I don't know if I have pictures with this building for the President of the Republic. Yes, I don't. Another building from 1957. He built a lot of office buildings. What can we say? A country that even when the economy of the country was not very auspicious, they still built a lot, and Oscar Niemeyer was there. Hospital, a trademark hospital. The silhouette reminds somehow a little bit of the apartment building in Berlin, but then we have this emphatic gesture, artistic or architectonic gesture on the first and the mezzanine in front of the building, which brings the building into the sphere of being interesting architecturally. Now Brasilia, here we will see quite a number of buildings, and in fact I don't show everything he built here because at one moment I said I had to stop also the time for starting the presentation was close by. So Brasilia, the new capital, he did various things here. He had a saying in the urban planning, and now we see the so-called monumental axis. The problem with Brasilia, maybe you know, is that the intention was very good. It was heroic, but there was a problem that in its idealism and its utopianism, it neglected how real life is, and it became for many years a place of some kind of a static grandeur. It was not alive. But when they began to build and bring in also workplaces, because that's what was missing, at a representational level, Brasilia was very imposing and interesting, but it didn't function as a city that was alive, because it missed the other ingredients that a city is based on. It is a grandiose theme, and it was an experiment, and a country was able to build it. But even now, I think there are problems with it. The spaces are too wide, and there is no density of activities. It's a formalistic gesture of ample dimensions that locally looks impressive here and there, certain buildings, but I don't think it functions very well even now. Although they made efforts, Brazil made efforts to make it, a lift-in city. This is the plan, the scheme, from the sky, from a vol d'oiseau, where Niemeyer, and he was not the only one that worked on the urban planning, but he designed most of the buildings here. What is to be said here is that an urbanist that has symbolic attributes is positive, is needed. The problem is, how do you marry this symbolism with the necessities and the realities of today's life? The Palace of Dawn, the presidential residence. The problem here is you'll see this building almost identically repeated for other functions, and I think this is problematic. There is a certain formal demagogy here that is appealing. There is sensuousness, there is rhythm, there is structural, integrity to an extent, but there is also a level of rhetorics, I think, that neglect some very harsh realities of Brazil. Now, the question is, should the capital city acknowledge those many problems that the country has, or just ignore them? What I'm trying to say, there is a level of splendor here that to an extent is unjustifiably glittering. It's decorative a little bit, it shows a dignity the nation aspire to arrive at, but I don't see too much of the very ethnic composition of Brazil. This is a building that doesn't truly say enough, I think, about the hybridity of the ethnic hybridity of the country, and other things that this great country. But this great country that was once described, Brazil, it is the country of the future, and it will always remain so. A malicious saying from someone, I forgot. So the country of the future that will always remain so. In other words, it will never arrive at that future. But this being said, we do have to admire what they did there. And maybe compare with Dhaka by Khan and Chandigarh by Le Corbusier, although here there are many more buildings as opposed to Dhaka and to Chandigarh. it is a clear belief in modernity, and I don't know, there is a level of optimism that perhaps is a little bit questionable, especially from today, from where we are now. I like this picture though during the construction, because the purity of the final work is arrived at through the efforts and the entanglements of building it. And somehow I would have liked to see the process being present somehow, even as a slight indication in the final work, but it disappeared from here to here, or from here to here. Anyway, this is a famous work, the cathedral, the Metropolitan Cathedral of Brasilia from 1958. And with the same simple gesture, Oscar Niemeyer creates a memorable building, perhaps a little too memorable if I am to express myself in a questionable way. It is an icon, but somehow this icon is too easily readable. And although you'll see pictures from the inside, it is an interesting building. What puzzles me a little is that Brasilia, or Brazil, which is a country without truly, a great cultural history in the field of architecture, was so open to embrace a form of modernity that was almost radical at the highest level, political level. And this is something that France didn't do, that the United States didn't do, Bangladesh did in Dhaka, and India did in Chandigarh, and Brazil did in Brasilia. I mean, look at this picture from the air of the cathedral. Is enigmatic, is emblematic, is an icon of creativity that conjures, I think, some connections with cosmos in a way. The unconventionality of bringing in figurative art within the modern building also is remarkable. Now, he built another church, the Church of Our Lady of Fatima from 1958, a smaller church. And you see here that typical Oscar Niemeyer handling the structure, just very discreetly supporting the roof at the corners. It's a fine building. I'm not so sure about this wall here, but even that shows a great lack of inhibition, which is, I think, to be admired. Also, the way he places the cross in the most fragile point of the whole structure. This also, I think, says something. Some commentators said, well, he was an atheist, a declared atheist, but he built, we just saw 3 churches. Maybe he built more. From what I know, he built 3 churches. But, he built a national cathedral in Brasilia. So the atheist had no problem at all. But just like Le Corbusier was himself, just like David Bowie, almost an atheist, and he built Ronchamp, he built Saint-Pierre de Firminy-Vert, and he built La Tourette. So I guess sometimes the atheists are good at building churches. The National Congress of Brazil, Congresso Nacional, 1958, this is the central piece of Brasilia, is the organism of power. And I like the fact that it plays with dualities. I almost see the diagram by Le Corbusier with the sun going up and at midday arriving here and then going under. and then at the bottom at night, and then rising up again. It's a meditation on the dualities of life and the flux and the reflux of life, and day and night, the cycles of life. And they maybe have to do also with the cycles of power and lack of power. It's bringing in some duality that is beneficial in the sense that it shows that life has its ups and downs, and it's not just gloriously going up. It's a very pure architecture, perhaps too pure, if we can say something like this. It's idealistic, it is white, it is emblematic, it is iconic. The interior is strikingly modern and almost futuristic. You could almost see a James Bond film being created here. Bravo to Brazil, but bravo with a second thought, and the second thought is derived from the fact that the idealism and the utopianism of the whole enterprise is exactly that, an ism. It's a little too removed from the realities of lived life, and but it is necessary. It is necessary as such, and I think in this vein, much more can be created. And unfortunately, I don't know of too many countries who would engage in something like this. And with this level of belief, faith in modernity, without anything retrograde or look at the purity of the plans. They are almost impeccable, graphically speaking. They are beautiful as drawings, as line drawings, but they represent the plans of this major building or ensemble of buildings in Brasilia. The Supreme Federal Tribunal or Federal Supreme Court, you see, is very similar to what we saw already. He used, I got even confused a little bit because it's very hard to identify one building with one function from another building with a different function. This is also, I think, a little bit problematic, but otherwise the buildings are very elegant and maybe to an extent uplifting. Palace of the Highlands, the presidential office, you see again, what's the difference between this building and this building? There isn't really a lot of difference, but the functions are different, although they are all related to the government's workings. Now the National Theatre, which is a different kind of building, very sculptural, monolithical, perhaps a little too monolithical. You still see the attraction for centrality that Oscar Niemeyer had, just like he had in the cathedral he built. It's kind of beneficial that after Oscar Niemeyer, I'll talk about Hundertwasser, who is such a different architect. Well, painter who became an architect. This is what you see, the dark sides of part of the picture are actually is the stair. And very interesting way of doing it. The facade of the National Theatre is done in this way. Another palace, the vice presidential residence. Well, another palace that the communist Oscar Niemeyer built. I wonder if communists should be allowed to build palaces. I mean, the very word seems to be an incongruity in the language of a communist. Communists should abstain probably from building palaces. A different word, not even palaces for the proletarians, or particularly those should be avoided. Square of the three powers, a symbolic square metaphorically charged from 1960s. Here is a sketch by him. I think this was the main problem. The spaces are too big between the buildings, and this is just, there isn't enough density, and because of it, the whole thing becomes a little bit decorative. And that's why Brasilia had for many, many years big problems. It couldn't be populated, and so it was a weak capital in a way, new capital. But some of the buildings are very interesting and powerful, and the language of modernity confers them a uniqueness that, for example, what other city in the world has such buildings, you know, in its in their capital cities? The tea house, this is an partly underground building. You see it on the left. It reminds me in a strange way when I look at this picture of the situation in Chandigarh, where in the background is the assembly building by Le Corbusier, and on the left the House of Shadows. Here we have the House of Tea. Kind of interesting. Why the House of Tea in such a politically charged, symbolically charged place? And I guess it's a place for relaxation, and you know, intentionally Niemeyer lowered its level, so you go a little bit down, so it doesn't compete with prestigious buildings in its proximity, if we can call it proximity. What you see here on the left, and we are going to see it a little bit more in detail, is a building for a different function, some kind of a museum. The Ministry of External Relations, another grandiose palace in a modernistic key. It is a palace indeed. You know, a very poetical stair designed by Oscar Niemeyer, maybe a little bit too poetical. Let's hope someone doesn't faint on that stair. But some architects avoid the parapet because the parapet brings in a level of prose which the poet might dislike. It is elegant, it's true. It does have elegance, but is elegance enough? This is the question. Sometimes it isn't, I think. This is the Pantheon of the Fatherland and Freedom, called in a very emphatic way. This is the building that, you know, the Pantheon of the Fatherland and Freedom. What can we say? The last picture of the presentation, and we are going to arrive there very soon, is this thing, which I don't know very well what it symbolizes. It might be that here there is a candle or a continuously activated flame or something. I don't know what it means, what its symbolism is. But it is refreshing to see, you know, modern architecture, monumental art in cooperating to create an urban environment that is looking towards the future. And this is the last picture of the presentation, and I think on Oscar Niemeyer, and I think is a very nice a very nice picture. And now we go to the last architect, a very, very different one, a painter who became an architect, and his birthday is also today. Hundertwasser, I have difficulties to pronounce his first name. I guess maybe it's not so difficult, Friedensreich Hundertwasser. And we'll arrive at the translation of his name because there is a translation. So he better known by his pseudonym. His name was actually Stowasser. Was an Austrian visual artist and architect who also worked in the field of environmental protection. Not too many architects do that, but he did that. Hundertwasser stood out as an opponent of the straight line and any standardization, expressing, here I would say, except his own, because he, you'll see, he was against the standardization, but not against his own standardizations. Expressing this concept in the field of building design, his best known work is the Hundertwasser house in Vienna, Austria, which has become a notable place of interest in the Austrian capital, characterized by imaginative vitality and uniqueness. His adopted surname is based on the translation of sto, the Slavic word for 100, into German. The name Friedensreich has a double meaning as peace realm or peace rich in the sense of peaceful. Therefore, his name Friedensreich Hundertwasser translates directly into English as peace realm 100 water. The other names he chose for himself, Regentag and Dunkelbunt, translate to rainy day and darkly multicolored. I like this fact. I like such names. You know, why? I think our names are so, in a way, untelling. Yeah, you know, why not call yourself the Peace Realm 100 Water? Anyway, this is the man. You wouldn't say that he was, you know, an important architect. You would say he was a gardener in on someone's estate. I guess this picture is taken in New Zealand, where he moved to after leaving Austria. An interesting man, actually, and I like him. You know, he built significant buildings in Europe, being a painter. Bravo to him. He had a vision, and he's dressed according to that vision. I mean, if you didn't know his buildings and you see this portrait, you would ask yourself, what kind of buildings would this man build? Well, we'll arrive at them, but not before we look at some actually modern drawings. They are rather paintings, and his paintings are like his buildings. Look at them, you know, lots of colors. There is some figuration, but there is also abstraction. It's a naive art. It is a folk art, but there is more to it. It's not just folk, and it's not just naive. It's also, I don't know, there are many things happening here, and there is also a certain level of abstraction. In a way, you could see a certain relationship, a discrete one, with Joseph Hoffmann. A certain infantilism, but this infantilism is seductive because it brings in, you know, a childlikeness that is perhaps needed in modernity. I am asking myself, how would the world be if we lived in an environment, you know, dominated by Hundertwasser aesthetics? I don't know. He is shocking for the architect. But I have to say, in Vienna, where I went for 3 years in a row with students, and I asked them what buildings they like the most, they didn't mention buildings by architects. They mentioned Hundertwasser. And they also mentioned a sculptor who built that church on top of a hill. This is interesting that you have architecture built by artists that is more seductive to students of architecture. Why? Because there is a level of freedom, of, you know, non-conformism, and it is refreshing. It is refreshing even to look at these colors and you know, the complexity of forms and the variety, the imagination, the longings, the dream-like atmosphere. Why not? What is interesting is that this man with these artworks ventured at one point into architecture, and he did it convincingly without compromise, and built quite a number of buildings. It is refreshing, actually, even in comparison with Oscar Niemeyer. This is a very different approach to art, to architecture, we'll see later on. On the other hand, we shouldn't idealize it either, because there is a level of I don't know, a certain longing for Arcadia, which is problematic, because life is not so without darkness as, but I think Hundertwasser didn't have too many illusions in this field either, because we saw his name he used. One was Rainy Day, and the other one had the work Dark, if I remember correctly, in it. So I think he was a man who saw the complexities of life and tried to, in a way, express them, but also escape them through art, through his artworks and his architecture. And now we arrive at building by building. The Hundertwasser house in Vienna, which I visited a few times, and we even indulge in having some ice cream sitting in front of it. Who'd have thought, you know, in a city like Vienna, to have this kind of building? You know, like it's a dream. It's a dream that was built. It's fantastic. It's in a way difficult to comprehend. How come that a cosmopolitan culture city like Vienna built something like this? But this only testifies about the generosity and the complexity of the city, that is capable to embrace even gestures that are very, very much off, so to speak. Look at the building, and that's exactly how it is. In Vienna. But Vienna had many dualities, and so maybe it's not such a surprise that such a building was built in Vienna. It would be maybe interesting to compare to an extent Antoni Gaudi with the Hundertwasser. Very different architects, but they do have something in common, in the sense that he enjoyed designing toilets, even public toilets, for some reason. All these ceramic tiles that he employed, you know, trying to bring plastic interest, artistic interest, to spaces that are usually not like this at all. You remember the checkers of Joseph Hoffmann? Well, they are rotated here sometimes. Look at the colors. I mean, they are burlesque, they are childlike, they are, you know, but it's not Walt Disney, actually. It would be also interesting to compare Walt Disney with Hundertwasser. Maybe the main difference is that here there is no corporate culture. It is the whimsical art and architecture of an individual, but there is no corporate ethos like Walt Disney has, although Walt Disney started also with one person, but that person became an institution, became a corporation. He is just a solitary man building the way he wanted to build, and he never became a corporation, and this shows. Now this is, I thought it was an incinerator. He also built an incinerator in Japan. Today, when I prepared the material, I discovered it's a district heating plant, and it is, yes, a plant, and it is in Vienna. And can you believe it? I have pictures with myself and the students in front of this building with the bicycles. It is in a way incredible that Vienna built such a, I don't know if it was built like this. He probably took care of an existing building, transformed it in this way. Maybe, I am not sure about this. But look at the facade. What modernist architect would do such a building for such a function? No architect. It took a crazy artist, so to speak, sorry, Mr. Hundertwasser, to propose something like this, and the city accepted it. But why should factories or plants look banal and grayish? Why? I am asking a question. And why shouldn't we have strawberries on the facade of a plant? Anyway, yeah, maybe we are too morose in our dealings with technology and with production and so on. Maybe we can be a little bit playful, maybe from time to time, at least. Yeah, this is the building seen from the other side. And I like this meeting between the burlesque images and then the technological fragments, and they kind of go well together, I think. This is probably his own hat. He did wear such a hat. Funny, I just noticed it. It is his hat, placed at the top of the building. Now, in Germany, in Darmstadt, a large housing complex. He loved the spiral, of course. Anyone who loves nature has to love the spiral. He was an adversary of the right angle, of the grids, and against standardization, although there are some standard elements in his architecture. For example, this Turkish, in a way, roofing that appears in many of his buildings, or in a number of his buildings. Here we almost have the skiing surface of Bjarke Ingels. Here there is no skiing taking place, but there is the green that he anticipated is very, very needed these days for fighting off pollution. Very different architecture indeed. It took someone who never went through an architecture school to do something like this, because if someone did go through architectural training, would not dare to do something like this, in no way. I mean, the architecture schools are busying themselves to totally dismiss this kind of architecture. But, the Germans built it, the Austrians built it, in Switzerland he built it, in Japan he built it, he built something also in New Zealand. I don't know what to say about this. It's too literal, too explicit, but what can we say? But look at those windows, they're all different. Like in the Jewish museum by Lipskin, but those windows, those diagonals, they are very, very different from these. But the attempt is the same, to fight off standardization by multiplying, by having a large number of distinct, different windows, various sizes and so on, although the style might be the same. So we are in Germany with Hundertwasser. I mean, look here, you know, why would he do this? Because he wanted to have a building that is not accepting the usual paradigm. Now, these kind of columns he uses in other works, and we already saw some. It's a burlesque building. Should we take it too seriously? I don't know. The Kunsthaus in Vienna, he's radical. He is a radical architect, although he comes from the side of naive art and folkish art. But strangely, he became radical in contrast with the rest of the city. And the rest of, we see here the checkers that Joseph Hoffmann used, but scattered, and you know, the whole atmosphere is very different from Joseph Hoffmann, who was still a rationalist, although a secessionist rationalist, if I can say so. A kindergarten in Frankfurt, dreamlike again. And again, I think it would be interesting to compare, for example, Walt Disney with the Hundertwasser. You would say there is a level of infantilism here that we, as serious, mature people, have a hard time to accept. As if we are not trembling children ourselves, within ourselves. I think we are, but we forgot to be as Hundertwasser aspired to be. We think this is not very serious. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe, I don't know. It depends what we mean by serious. One thing is for sure, many of his buildings have a lot of green around them, and even springing from within themselves, so to speak. A motorway restaurant, what can we do? The cars are the cars, the kings of today's life, still. But the building he proposed is somehow telling a different story. The cars seem to be so morose, you know, compared to his building. It's actually, I don't know why I feel like laughing when I look at this picture and compare the cars with the building. It's like the revenge of the artist. The artist reacted to the world of the cars and the highways, building for the highway, a motorway restaurant. Nothing very cultural about it, but he made something, I would say, interesting. The Hot Springs Village in Styria, in Austria, a large ensemble again of buildings. I'm not saying that this is truly the architecture I dream of, because I do find it a little bit infantile, but he shows a way towards some other kind of architecture that perhaps we should not be totally unaware of. There are risks here, no doubt, because there are the risks of being very tempted. I think an excessive infantilism is the other side of of the morose. This is the third time I think I use this word morose mentality that the so-called serious urban civilized culture promotes. But they are the two sides of the same coin in a way. If you find refuge in fantasy, is only because there is a reaction to a world that is very prosaic and very so-called real. But the fantastic that is explicitly fantastic and sufficient into itself, I don't think is enough. I think Dostoevsky was right when he said that the true real is more fantastic than the fantastic. But to discover that true real that has the dream within is not easy at all. So in this tension between the dream and the reality, what we call reality, because what is actually reality? It could be problematic if we find refuge in a dream world that is not addressing the other side of life, which is called the real. To have a conjunction between them is not easy. And I'm not sure he arrived at that conjunction. Yes, he built the buildings, but is this truly the way to build today? I mean, what if the whole world looked like this? You know, it would look like some kind of a bonanza, you know, like would all dress up like clowns and walk on wires and, you know, jump into the air. But I don't know. I'm open to discussions about this. A kirche, a church, also in Styria, the same man, the same architect. You know, he was against standardization, but he uses this all the time in his buildings. And anyway, he's using his own standards. It's a church. In essence, it's not very different from, you know, traditional churches, but he modifies it through his artistic language. Yeah, I think it is problematic when you try to bring the dream world into reality and mimic some kind of innocence. And but to assume the world of the dream, I think, is positive and necessary. I don't know if this is truly the way to go. On the other hand, his attempt to be very concerned with what they are called environmental issues, with nature, with a certain level of spontaneity, of you know, purity, innocence, is a good thing. But the frontier between this and what I call the Walt Disney mentality is very thin, I'm afraid. This is not Walt Disney, but it's close to it. A market hall, the same architect, the same kind of building. Of course, I mean, I don't know if, of course, do we need a rainbow behind it? The building itself invokes the rainbow, but here we have it in this representation anyway, in this picture. What can we say? Would such a building make me happy? I don't know. I don't know. But it does represent, to an extent, the road not taken, psychologically speaking. This is the road not taken. Germany again, another residential ensemble. It would be also interesting to compare this with French interventions of Thaler de Architectura and Ricardo Bofill. I'm referring to particularly what they built near Paris, a different kind of collective architecture, collective housing, very different. This is, you know, a fairy tale architecture. But life is, I mean, when you think just of the multitude of cars and parking lots and garages, you know, and then you look at this building, I mean, how would those cars look like in the proximity of these buildings? Well, Quixote winery, of course, good wine would make a Don Quixote of all of us. This is the only building in the United States by Hundertwasser. Is against standardization, but look at the columns. They are the same standard columns that he used in Vienna and Germany and the Netherlands. Anyway, a very different architect from Oscar Niemeyer and even from Joseph Hoffmann. His compatriots, so to speak, in the realm of time, because they were all three born on December 15th, not the same year, it's true. And now we look at an incineration plant in Osaka in Japan, and it amazes me that Japan built something like this, but Japan was very open and is very open to all kinds of influences, and especially in the 80s when I think this was built. So this is some kind of, you know, revenge of the terrified human being by death, because an incinerator cannot avoid making us think of death. And so it is, we laugh in order not to cry, something like this. To make an incinerator look like it is part of an amusement park is I think open to debate. You know, is death really is treating death in similar terms to an amusement park the appropriate? On the other hand, yes, we shouldn't become morbid, but again, this is the other side of morbidity: is we laugh in order not to cry, something like this, perhaps. I mean, this makes me think of a possible title or theme: the cemetery as an amusement park, the incinerator as an amusement structure. Las Vegas and death. A toilet in New Zealand. I don't know if he built something else in New Zealand, but he built a public toilet, and you can see it here. Another burlesque building by Hundertwasser. It's a good thing he preserved that tree. And I guess why not? But then why yes? Railway station in Germany with his non-standard columns. He was persistent. He you know, to arrive at building so many structures and buildings, it requires tenacity, a belief in yourself, in himself. Now I don't know what this means. Citadel in Magdeburg in Germany. It's another housing complex of large dimensions. And yes, it stands out. It is not the typical block of flats by any means. He also worked with some architects. I know for the Hundertwasser house, he employed the services of a licensed architect who probably took care of the unpleasant parts of the project, who now fights for having his name also added to the authorship of the building because he's left out and only Hundertwasser's name is whispered or pronounced. The Netherlands. He built in the Netherlands as well. And again, the fact that the Netherlands, which has important architects by itself, imports the talent of someone like Hundertwasser shows something about the country that is very open-minded and willing to assume all kinds of experiments. Why not? Germany again, we are approaching the end of our presentation today. This is a tower, burlesque itself, and he did it. It's a life which wants to assert itself as a place of explorations and joy and unending discoveries. But somewhere, somehow, this explicit form of so-called joy leaves me a little bit unsatisfied. Because the fun mentality is, I think, a little bit problematic. And I think there is a difference between fun and joy. I am not saying that, again, there is a difference between Hundertwasser and what Walt Disney represents. But there is something of that amusement mentality that, yes, life should be joyous, no doubt. But from a healthy joy to, you know, this kind of too explicit, funny aesthetics, I personally have some troubles with, but I still went to visit his buildings, and I still think they are needed, because they perhaps we need more architects who are able to laugh at themselves and to take themselves a little bit less seriously, and certainly not in using the rationalistic paradigms. There are other forms of building, and Hundertwasser just shows it. In fact, right near the factory, the plant in Vienna, there is a building by Zaha Hadid, and both me and the students acknowledge that Zaha seemed timid and rigid and too white and too contrived in the proximity of Hundertwasser. And I was just talking about Zaha Hadid. Anyway, the closure of our presentation today is here. I think this is the last image. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. That was fascinating.